Hi, my name's Andrew Brown. I'm here with my colleague Matt Hitchcock. Hi, Matt.
Hi.
So we're from the Queensland Conservatorium Research Centre at Griffith University, and we're here today to have a bit of a chat with Matt about some of his research, and particularly just to see how he's coping with doing his research in these COVID-19 times where we're sort of off campus and working from home. So Matt, let's start with just the big overview really of your
Yeah.
research area. So you said to me that you're calling your research area sonic tectonics. That's
Yeah.
probably a term which is new to most people. Do you want to explain a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yeah, it's the idea of tectonics comes from geology, geography, and cartography, where we're talking about the movement of physical structures and the mapping of physical structures um, in the Earth's crust. And one of the things that struck me over a long period of time was the relationship I have with sound and the surface of sound, the topology being the movement of different frequencies and their amplitudes that make up complex waveforms that we experience as music. And as a engineer, a composer, and a sound designer, thinking in terms of the spectral and sonic surfaces of sounds and how they interrelate, because we as humans are very relational. When we're comparing two objects, it's the relationship between those two objects that changes the context of our perception of one of those objects, which speaks to also uh, uh, visual illusions and the sonic illusions that we engage in as composers for the stereo domain and mono domain. And a large part of composing and arranging, even for traditional orchestras, is thinking about the textures. And again, there's a cross-modal reference in terms of the physicality of texture and how sound textures can impact us emotionally, and how we go about designing a spatial and musical experience where, for me, music is the organisation of sounds in time and space. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's about notes. It's about the way inharmonic sounds such as cymbals or a wet cork on glass creates sound, what that texture is, how that affects us, and how we can use those compositionally.
Wow, okay, sounds quite extensive. Do you want to give us a couple of more specific examples of how, where in that kind of landscape your current work is?
My work over the last 8 years has really moved in the research space away from the stereo domain into the surround domain. Um, I started in the early 2000s when surround was really kicking off as a commercial format. However, through format wars, through different companies, it didn't really take off in a commercial way until we had the DVD Blu-ray specifications. So what I'm mainly working with is the 7.1 surround and more recently Dolby Atmos surround, which are physical configurations of speakers which we'd find typically in movie theatres, but also in home theatres. And people are progressively more starting to produce music in these surround formats. There's about 2,000 albums available at the moment, or 2,000 works, I should say. And I've got about 200 albums in various surround formats. So the physical dislocation and fragmentation of sounds and reorganization in time and space, where the space is around us and in the last 2 years also above us. So I've increased that into the Dolby Atmos arena where we've got 4 speakers above us and 8 speakers around us.
Yeah, wow. So I see in the background behind you, there's a couple of speakers that you have in your studio there
Mm.
behind you, and you've probably got more that I can't see.
Yep.
So I can understand, how that's great. You can work at home, you've got a studio, and you can do that. But I anticipate that in these times where we're not really able to gather in studios and stuff, that you've been focusing maybe a little bit more on how we can transmit some of that over the internet, just through stereo headphones like what you and I are wearing at the moment. Do you want to tell us a bit about how that's changed things?
Yeah, look, that's a very interesting eventuality that's come out of COVID creatively. So with COVID, I teach surround at the conservatorium as well as a researcher, and the change to working from home and working from headphones really fast-tracked those things that were bubbling around in the background, and I forefronted those over the last 3 months or so, and been working with a number of technologies where I started by taking my real surround, my 8-channel surround, virtualizing that into ambisonics, which is a way of describing a sound sphere, surround in full 360 all angles, and then being able to render that or transmit that in what's called binaural, which is an extension of virtual surround whereby we have to use headphones. So some of the examples that we'll play today, you need headphones to experience them. So there's the virtualization of what has been created for a physical space into a complex ambisonic process, and then the final stage, which is being able to transmit that only over 2 channels into headphones.
Wow, sounds really complex. Do you have any examples you can play for us about some of the works that you're working on at the moment?
Yes. So what you're about to hear here, and I'd suggest that maybe you pause the video and go and get your headphones and put them on to experience this, because it will not work over speakers. But this first one is a very directional shotgun microphone recording some water and the cavitation of water up at Cedar Creek. And this is the mono recording. Now what you should be able to hear there is a complex interaction of different movements, different speeds of movement, different topologies of sound, the surface of the sound moving in different ways. And it's all there within a very complex waveform. Now, whenever we're listening to complex sounds or any sound, it's actually arriving at our ears as a singular, a mixed set of fluctuations, pressure changes in air. And it's then our brain that makes meaning from that and breaks that apart. So what I've done is, with that mono recording, simply split it 12 times in layers, and then moved layers slightly to the left and slightly to the right, which gives us a sense of stereo, because stereo is basically subtle changes between the left ear and the right ear.
And Matt, can I just
Yeah.
just to clarify, when you say layers, my understanding is that's layers within the frequency spectra. Is that correct? So
Yeah.
high frequency layer and a mid frequency layers and lower frequency layers. Yeah.
Even more fine-tuned than that. So we go from the really high frequency splashes of the water down to the low squelches, where breaking really the spectral elements, the little melodies, the little surfaces into the frequencies, and they're static. And it's done in such a way that if you put them all back together again, there's no change from the original. And that in itself, using current technologies, was a real challenge, because there's no technologies that will actually do this. And we'll start to hear details exposed in the stereo that we don't necessarily hear in the mono, because we're placing a different salience on those by separating them in space, just in the stereo domain. But to me, the stereo is still in front of me. I'm a voyeur looking at a picture of that sound. So this is the stereo. And what happens there is something that's absolutely fascinating for me and at the core of a lot of the work that I do, which is it's called auditory streaming. And our brain recognizes that all those elements come from the same source. So despite the fact that I fractured them, dissected them, and moved them around and changed their context, the information is still the same, the sound is still exactly the same. We just have a different sense of relationship to the envelopment of that sound. So again, quickly, here's the mono. Stereo in front of us. And then virtual surround. And what I'm aiming for there, and I must say it's much more effective in a real space between 8 speakers or 12 speakers, but we still get a sense of that in the virtual reality, is becoming immersed within a sound. So that's a source is a single microphone recording of a complex event, broken down into 12 layers and then steered around us in such a way that our brain sums that information back into the whole. There is no change in that sonic information apart from its location. And then over the top of that, we can do some more sophisticated things such as move parts and elements around, change their salience by changing their level, even replace. It's a process that I call suffusion, where I'll take 2 different recordings of 2 different things, take tiny slices and then start replacing slices. So for instance, a male vocal and a female vocal doing exactly the same thing, and you start replacing slices of the male vocal with slices from the female. At some point you start to recognize, actually, this isn't the original singer.
Yeah, I have to say, Matt, yeah, you can clearly hear, particularly between the mono and the stereo, there's quite a dramatic difference in where the sound appears to be coming from. As you know, you seem to be much more immersed in the sound than sort of just observing it. So to use your creek analogy, it's like you're kind of in the creek rather than actually on the creek bank, just recording things. So that's fascinating. Yeah. Well, thank you very much about that. Do you have any final things you need to say before we go? It's been just a teaser, really, of some of this work, and I'm sure it's very deep and complex, and we can have people look up some of your publications or some of your compositions to get more insight. But have you got any final things to say about?
Look, I'd say as a composer or a sound designer, whether you're working in stereo, this has got some fantastic implications for EDM and IDM, electronic dance music, as it does for orchestral music, as it does for mastering. I think the concept of getting into or within a sound and being able to see and manipulate aspects and elements of that sound in these ways opens up a new wealth of creative possibilities. And where I'm going with this is virtualization and putting it up on YouTube. This is just a technical demonstration, but of compositions which are about sonic illusions and the idea of becoming immersed in sound in a different way than we're maybe used to.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting. I mean, and in addition to all the things you mentioned, I can imagine that the whole computer game and virtual reality environments would be ripe for this, because it sounds much more immersive as you've done that.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, thank you very much for your time today, and we'll look out for more examples of this, maybe some technical things that we can download and look at, and certainly listening to some of your compositions when you get them up on YouTube for us to have a listen to in our bedrooms.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for your time. No worries, man.
Cheers.